Cable TV has a reputation for giving bad people a big spotlight. We see time and time again TV hosts getting exposed for not being so nice of people behind the scenes that people see live on the air. People like Ellen DeGeneres and Dr. Phil have recently come under fire for their practices behind the scenes of their TV shows, and this is more so Ellen, who was exposed for her toxic workplace behavior, and how she would treat lower level employees as if they were nothing. And Dr. Phil built up a reputation for using his guests with mental illnesses as a tool to boost ratings and viewership, and he did this for many years. But if you think those issues are bad, then you will find that televangelists are a lot worse. If you don't know what a televangelist is, it's defined as an evangelical preacher who appears regularly on television to preach and appeal for funds. The very first appearance from televangelists happened in the early 1950s, where they made the move from radio to TV in an attempt to grasp a wider audience. And with television growing in popularity, so did these televangelists. They eventually created their own networks for religious preaching. But cracks started to show for some of these preachers, and a lot more of them continued to be exposed for some of their practices through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Peter Popoff was possibly the most notable televangelist in the 80s who was exposed for lying to his audience. Now, Peter Popoff put on an act during his sermons. During these sermons, he announced the address or a specific illness that someone had in the crowd. He stated that it was a God-given gift that was quickly disproven. It was revealed later on that he used a radio transmitter that was operated by his wife behind the scenes to receive information through his earpiece, to accurately repeat addresses or prayers. He and his wife received the information because of prayer request cards that the audience filled out. But before Peter Popoff was exposed for lying, he was generating over $4 million a year, which is equivalent to $14 million in today's society. Peter Popoff was just one of many televangelists during that time that would use his platform to steal and deceive his audience, and would make millions of dollars while doing so. Today on the channel, we talk about another notorious scammer within the televangelist community who really hasn't been covered as much or as often as Peter Popoff, but who is equally as bad as him. Jim Bakker was a televangelist in the 70s who became extremely famous and wealthy due to his successful network that broadcasted his work to a widespread audience. Before he created his own TV show and network, Jim Bakker worked as the host of the 700 Club, which was a long-time running Christian talk show that was created back in the 1960s, but still has a spot on TV as of today. Jim eventually left the 700 Club to start his own venture. Jim Bakker hosted a TV show called the PTL Club, which stood for the Praise the Lord Club, that first aired in 1975. This show was small and moved around a lot before it had a set recording studio in North Carolina. Once the show found its long-term recording studio location, Jim Bakker and his wife at the time, Tammy Faye Bakker, went to work and started to record more shows that would fund future endeavors. Eventually, Jim had aspirations to create his own TV network, a network where he didn't have to pay another TV network in order to get a time slot on the TV guide. So Jim and Tammy started to host telethons that would help raise funds for their new network. Jim told his viewers that if they pledged to become PTL partners, that they would fund and fuel shows that needed the money. The former chief of security was on record stating, "We had a cash office, and at times there was certainly more money in than I could imagine. People would send us mink coats, diamond rings, deeds. I mean, we got all sorts of donations." Now, once they saw that they had a knack for persuading viewers into giving them funds, they would hold telethons for anything they needed money for. And this plead for money caught the attention of the FCC, who started to investigate Jim Bakker in the late 1970s for misusing the money that he raised. His reasoning for the money was to help other struggling churches and to spread the word of gospel overseas to Korea, Cyprus, and Brazil. But that ended up being false, and it turned out that he used the $350,000 to fund his own personal project of a theme park. He described it as a Christian-themed Disneyland theme park that consisted of a water park, a 500-room grand hotel, and a train. This theme park sat on 2,300 acres of land that Jim Bakker would later call Heritage USA.
It is a total living center as well. It's a place for retirement. It's a place for family vacations. It's a camp meeting grounds. It is a place for crippled children center. It's a girls' home for unplanned pregnancies. It's a street people center, Fort Hope. It's so many things that it's hard to just say in one sentence what it is.
Why mix all that together, though? The amusement park with the prayer services and home for unwed mothers?
Because we're total people. Christians, you know, don't go to monasteries to live. Christians live in a real world. They need exercise. They need food. they need to have fun. And so this is geared to the total family, to the total people. And the water park is for fun, and yet it's a tool of evangelism. We have 100 young students that are preparing for the ministry that are our lifeguards. And they're out there witnessing to others and helping kids and talking to them, and there's music and concerts there in the park. So it's all really geared to our ministry.
Another way Jim Bakker generated the funds for this new venture was through his supporters. He asked his followers to give him $1,000, and in return, they would receive lifetime partnerships that would entitle them to an annual 3-night stay at the Heritage Grand Hotel. The FCC started to take their investigation much more seriously, and they watched everything Jim was doing for 3 years. But after those 3 years ended, Jim came out unscathed. The FCC commissioners fought to keep the case open, but eventually internal conflict within the FCC would lead to a 4-3 ruling to drop the case, which greatly benefited Jim Bakker. Not only was he a free man without jail time, but this made his followers like him even more, with him going on record to label his case with the FCC satanic attacks from the federal government. After this hearing, Jim became even more rich and even more powerful, and for a while it seemed like he would be untouched, with the Washington Post even writing a story about Jim Bakker and how he prevailed after the case was dropped, stating it was after Bakker's victory at the FCC that his Christian ministry became the money machine of his dreams. Revenue skyrocketed from $28 million in 1978 to $129 million last year. So too did his penchant for luxury. He bought condos, he bought cars, he bought furs for Tammy Faye. The ministry began spending millions in PTL contributions that auditors now believe were diverted for the Bakker's personal use. The article continued with, the counting room, the lifeblood of Jim Bakker's dream, came from a small counting room inside the pyramid-shaped executive compound on the Heritage grounds. During the mid-1980s, the Daily Mail would sometimes bring in more than $200,000. 5 employees cut open the envelopes and counted the take, and at 3 p.m. sharp, an armored car arrived to haul the cash away. And Bakker timed mail pleas to arrive the same day Social Security checks hit the streets. Jim Bakker was one of the wealthiest televangelists in the 1980s, and it seemed like this powerhouse of generating money would never come to an end, until cracks started to show with the couple who made millions of dollars in funding. In January of 1987, Tammy Faye Bakker had a breakdown. She started to hallucinate in her home, and that's when her drug problem reached its peak. Tammy went to rehab with a prescription drug problem, and Jim and her had to release a video talking about the whole entire situation.
By a revelation that Tammy had a drug problem and would enter a hospital in Southern California.
And I just had no idea, Jim, that you couldn't mix over-the-counter drugs. I had no idea.
Then shortly after that, Jim would be exposed for a sex scandal that happened in 1980. Jessica Hahn claimed that in December of 1980, at the age of 21, Jim Bakker allegedly SA'd her, and then the ministry then paid her $200,000 to keep quiet. After this news broke out, Jim Bakker resigned from PTL and gave the company to Jerry Falwell, who later stated that the company was in a lot of debt and was bleeding $2 million a month. It was discovered that the Bakkers had a bunch of homes, private jets, and luxury cars, which was a big reason for the company's demise. In 1988, Jim was indicted for 8 counts of mail fraud and 15 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. A year later, a jury found Jim guilty of all 24 counts and was sentenced to 45 years in jail and was ordered to pay a $500,000 fine. During jail, Tammy would request a divorce and shortly after married Jim's associate. Jim was able to leave prison early and only served 5 years, leaving prison in 1994. In 2003, Jim created a new ministry called Morningside in the Ozarks of Missouri and hosted a show called The Jim Bakker Show that now talks about the end of the world and the end of days and sells end of the world products that some YouTubers actually reviewed.
Now, you may remember Jim Bakker from back in the day when he and his wife Tammy Faye were asking people to give them money to do things like build a giant holy theme park.
Yeah.
Well, he went to prison for accounting fraud, but now he's back and he's selling giant buckets of non-perishable apocalypse food. This came to our attention because Vic Berger has made some hilarious edits of Jim and his new wife selling the food.
Rank it.
Yeah, we do.
So let's take a look at what we got
See
here.
if you can lift this big old bucket up, Link. Okay, now there are several different types of Jim Bakker buckets. We got the tasty pantry bucket for $175. Now you can see that it doesn't have Jim Bakker branding on it, but this is the brand that he sells. We call it the Jim Bakker bucket, but he's actually selling this
Food storage.
Augustin Farms.
Emergencies.
Okay, so this thing has 18 food varieties, individually packaged, 283 servings, a total of 49,390 calories, total of 28 pounds of food, a shelf life of 25 years. And you know what? There's a bonus of 60 servings of honey powder.
And when it's all done, you can just fill it up with your crap.
Now, Jim Bakker was recently in some controversy in 2020 when he tried to sell a product called Silver Solution that claimed it could cure COVID and other illnesses with absolutely no backing from the FDA or anyone else. This led to him being sued and having to pay over $150,000 in restitutions to his viewers who bought the product. Jim Bakker is an example of a con man who uses the Bible or human fear to his advantage. Even though he stated that the Heritage USA was going to be used for good, it is now a shell of its former self and left abandoned and unfinished. But how do you feel about Jim Bakker or televangelists in general? Let me know in the comments below. This has been the end of the video. If you want to send me new content creators or anyone else for me to look at and make a video on, the best way to do so is through my Instagram or through my Discord. Both will be linked in the comments below. Also, if you join my Discord, you can ask me a bunch of questions in the Q&A channel that will also be linked in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I also do have a second channel that will also be linked in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.